So this story happened in our current location in Barton-on-Sea, the Great Fire. Sunday, May 18th, 1947, had the misfortune to be the most tragic day in the history of the school. The New Milton Advertiser, so that's our local newspaper, front page banner headline states, "Barton School Fire Drama. Maid loses her life, but 82 boys saved." The maid was Miss Josephine Wood. Mr. Ingleby, County Coroner, stated that the origin of the fire is unknown, and I don't think it ever can be known. According to the coroner, but for the extraordinary presence of mind and discipline displayed at the school, the most appalling catastrophe might have happened. So he's saying that because of the way everyone acted and reacted to the event, it saved many, many lives that potentially could have been lost because it was such a bad fire. Mr. Curry, now current owner of the Advertiser and Times, so this local newspaper, recalled as a young reporter attending the scene. The fire was the worst the district had known for many years. The blaze, fanned by a strong breeze, spread very rapidly, and the beautiful building soon became an almost total wreck. According to Doreen Mascal, a member of the domestic staff, a young master who had been out on the playing field raised the alarm. Some of the older boys had been playing cricket on the field after the evening's chapel service, so out on the grass in front of the building. Evidently, Miss Durlston was alerted by the shout, "There's smoke coming out of the roof." The time was 7:10 in the evening. Pat Cox, the headmaster at the time, having completed his routine rounds of visiting the junior dormitories, was conversing in the hall with Commander and Mrs. Stubbs when Miss St. Cross, the music mistress, ran in saying, "There's a fire in the trunk room near dormitory 8. So a dormitory is basically a bedroom for the boarders, the pupils who were sleeping at school, and they shared a room all together. Geoffrey Bailey had telephoned for the local fire brigade. Pat Cox, the headmaster, instructed Miss Dawson to evacuate the children, whilst he, Mr. Bailey, and Commander Stubbs grabbed fire extinguishers to fight the blaze. A pupil at the time named Stephen Montague Jones, in his account that was written in 1999, clearly remembered having folded his clothes on top of his bedside locker, very neat Durlstonian, and getting into bed ready for matron's rounds when he saw smoke drifting across the dorm 5 window. His first thoughts were of a bonfire. However, minutes later, a very harassed matron swept in and said, "Get dressed at once and stand by your beds. I shall be back in a few minutes." The tone of the voice was such that we all got dressed quickly, he recounts. She appeared moments later and we followed her down the back stairs, through the headmaster's quarters and out onto the playing fields. So that would be from the lighthouse down into the drawing room, you know, where the match teas are on a Wednesday. Some of the older boys were upstairs in the dormitories but not yet in bed, and Miss Dawson was able to evacuate them through the headmaster's house again. None of the boys was left unaccounted for, so everyone was safe. All the pupils were safe. In his evidence to the coroner, Mr. Cox, the headmaster, recalled how he arrived at the top of the stairs to find the trunk room a mass of flames. Commander Stubbs broke down the door to get to the seat of the fire. As the door gave way, the increased draught fanned the flames to such intensity that the fire extinguishers were quite useless. So we all know that fire feeds off oxygen, so banging down the door just let all that oxygen in and then made the flames larger. Downstairs, Doreen Mascal and the housekeeper, who were preparing the evening meal for the resident staff, also saw the smoke. The domestic staff left the building and congregated in the shack. Doreen Mascal believed that all of the domestics were safe until it was noticed that Mrs. Bessie Stockley, the headmaster's maid, was missing. According to all accounts, Bessie was trapped in her upstairs bedroom on the top floor, cut off from the stairs. Mr. Cox and Commander Stubbs, realising that Bessie was in difficulty, made their way to the end of the corridor nearest the private accommodation. With quickness of thought, Commander Stubbs located the trapdoor and, by standing on a chest of drawers, banged on the trapdoor to alert Bessie. Now, these trapdoors are literally hatches in the floor. So in our main school, we've got quite a few levels, and the hatches used to open up, and then you would have like a little rope that you'd shimmy down so that you can escape. And because the corridors were so long, and the fire stairs wells were, they didn't exist then, this is how they used to escape from the top floor, and there was quite a few of them along the way. So when you're next in school, you might have already noticed them, but in the maths corridor, which is the middle level, look up, because you'll see an outline of these trapdoors, because they were built in again, and also outside the humanities room as well. So have a look out for those. In the accounts given by Miss Durlston and Dory Maskell, Bessie was encouraged to jump through the hatch. However, in evidence, Mr. Cox stated that Stubbs handed Bessie down to him. So slightly different accounts of evidence of how she actually got from one floor to the next. Brian Sharple, who left Durlston in 1947, so he was a pupil, described the fire safety measures in the dormitories in his letter in 1999, and here they are. My own first dormitory in that building was on the second floor in the attic. A bit of a loft really, I think limited to only about 7 boys. The centre of the room contained a floor escape hatch, which a suitable gym-style rope below for the occupants to climb down if the need arose. The dormitories below had a similar arrangement down to the ground floor. Having rescued Bessie, Mr. Cox, Commander Stubbs and Mr. Hooker returned to the seat of the fire. On the way, Miss Kathleen Stanley, also known in evidence as Catherine, staggered towards them. Mr. Cox passed her over to the others as he endeavoured to reach the maid's room. Miss Stanley was disabled, having an artificial leg. She was, according to Brian Sharp, quite a formidable woman and tended to frighten the life out of us young boys. So she was obviously very strong-minded. So that's how she made her way out. Some of the domestic staff had made the assumption that Miss Stanley and Miss Josephine Wood, who had Sunday as the half day of duty, were off-site. They usually went out on Sunday evenings, but on this occasion had taken tea in their room and were resting, unknown to others in the school. Miss Stanley gave a detailed account of the tragedy that unfolded on the second floor whilst the boys were assembling on the playing field away from danger. After hearing the fire alarm but initially took no action, she heard the boys shouting, adding that was a common thing at school. They started to put on their uniforms, and as they did so, saw smoke coming. Under the door, Kathleen stated in evidence that Josephine opened the door and immediately the room became full of smoke and we heard some crackling. The ladies screamed for help and made their way to the window. Thick smoke obscured their view. Kathleen recalled they were at the window for possibly 3 or 4 minutes, hoping someone would come. Both ladies suffered breathing difficulties and Josephine was becoming hysterical. So the best thing to do in those situations is just try to keep as calm as possible. But unfortunately, Josephine just couldn't manage it. Kathleen led the way to the door and out into the corridor. She believed that Josephine, her friend of 6 years, was behind her, following. Kathleen somehow managed to reach the first floor. The banisters were boiling hot, she recalled. My hair was singed and my face burnt. When asked by the coroner why she was unable to use the escape hatch, as Bessie Stockley did, she stated that the smoke was just so thick she could hardly see her way. Kathleen used her normal route to the stairs. So she had that senses, she used her senses, her recall memory to guide her down her usual route. Unfortunately, whilst Kathleen escaped, Josephine didn't follow, and she was suffocated by the smoke, and attempts to rescue her were hampered because of the intense heat. But also there's a couple of other reasons why. The recollections of Miss Dawson and Doreen Mascal differ from the evidence given in the inquest. Miss Dawson suggests that both ladies reached the stairwell, but that Josephine in fact returned to her room to pick up her post office savings book. She also mentioned that the book was later recovered on the ground floor. So his number one rule is never go back to get something. So she broke that rule. Fireman John Troke, a full-time member of the National Fire Service, said he arrived on the first appliance, so fire engine, about 7:38 or 7:40. Now, if you recall, the first person to see the smoke was at 7:10 when they raised the alarm, so a good half an hour later. And the first thing that they did on arrival, so the fire engines, what they did on arrival, was to get up to the room where they were told Miss Wood was. So as soon as they were there, they went straight up to her window. However, it was unfortunately far too hot for the man who tried to get into the room. Mr. Harding, Area Fire Prevention Officer of Southampton, arrived on the scene later at 9 p.m. So almost 2 hours after the fire started, to find that the upper story had fallen completely through. Although there was very little evidence as to the cause of the fire, a fault in the electrical wiring was suspected. Officially, the cause has been recorded as unknown. Now, you'll be very pleased to hear that our school has been rebuilt with modern materials and electricity pathways. Now, back then, materials were very different and they were quite flammable. So that's why it all went up in a blaze so quickly. Also, nowadays, the process and protocol is different, and our fire service, we have many more engines and teams, so I just want you guys to have that in your head whilst I'm reading this. So the pupil, Stephen Montague Jones, vividly described the intensity of the fire. He says, as a young boy, he watched the fire in wonderment as the flames started to burst through the roof. We were able to identify Dorm 5, which by then was a yellow furnace with windows bursting out with the heat. Mr. Pat Cox, the headmaster, had singed eyebrows. Brian Sharp mentioned that Pat Cox, the headmaster, told him, owing to the extensive glass areas and awkward construction of the building, it was virtually impossible to raise any ladders. A very sad event. Miss Dawson, in her recollections of the fire, states strongly, the fire brigade was delayed because the fire engine failed to start. So that's quite interesting, this bit of evidence here. So the New Milton Advertiser reporter, so the local newspaper reporter, in a recent interview when this history book was written in 1999, year 2000, with the author, also claims that the appliance blew up. So the fire engine blew up, indicating some mechanical problems. It should be pointed out that the evidence given to the coroner makes no mention of a breakdown of an appliance. The coroner is quoted as follows: it took about 7 minutes to get to the fire. There did not seem to have been any undue delay, but we know that the first fire engine was there half an hour after the first call. Mr. Pat Cox, writing in the Durlstonian, said the New Milton Fire Brigade arrived too late and in too few numbers to do much good. So there's two bits of evidence there that contradict each other. So not sure if the fire engine was delayed or not, but it seems like they were half an hour late. Given the severity of the blaze, appliances were summoned. So fire engines were summoned from Burley, Brockenhurst, Lyndhurst, Bournemouth and Southampton, including the other one from New Milton. So 6 fire stations because it was such a huge fire. Great difficulty was experienced in getting a sufficient volume of water to fight this fire. The first appliances drew water from a 3-inch water main, while later pumps took water from a pond at Beckton House and Well. The first unit to arrive comprised a water tender and 3 firefighters. A fire brigade official stated that the scale of the fire was so large that not enough appliances could reach the scene in time to avert the catastrophe. It appears from the time of the blaze was spotted at 7:10 in the evening to the time the first appliance, the first fire engine, left the New Milton fire station at 7:31, arriving at 7:38, which is almost half an hour later than the call. The fire was out of control, and poor Miss Wood, Josephine Wood, had already died. The design and construction of the building, with voids in the roof, enabled the flames to spread uncontained through the whole building. Local residents offered accommodation for the boys for the night. So Stephen Montague Jones, a pupil from then, remembers being accommodated in a nearby house along with 2 other pupils. On the Monday, the boys were sent home. Miss Dawson recalls that some boys were put up for the night at Durlston Golf Club. Stephen Montague Jones returned to Durlston a few days after the fire to reclaim some possessions that had been salvaged. So this young boy, who was a pupil, he came back to get some of his things. And this is what he says in 1999 in a letter of what he recalls. I still have vivid memories of the burnt-out buildings with their stark outside walls and a tangle of twisted, blackened bedsteads as a result of the intense heat. During the rest of the summer term, some of the boys were sent to other schools. Mr. Pat Cox refunded 3/4 of the fees. Thankfully, the directors of the Grand Marine Hotel, Barton-on-Sea, offered their facilities while the school was being rebuilt. 61 boys and 10 staff were housed at the hotel in Barton. Mr. Cox lost all of the school accounts books in the blaze. He reported that staff lost everything. Mr. Cox estimated a loss of around £5,000. The insurers met the rebuilding costs, and a well-known firm of local builders called Drews commenced the task of raising a new school from the ashes of the old. So that's the story of the Great Fire at our school, our current building in Durlston-on-Sea. I hope you enjoyed it.